There we
Okay. All right.
go. All right, Rudy Valdez. Thank you. Go ahead.
Do I have to compliment you again now
Yeah,
that you're
please
recording?
start over with
This
all the compliments. Just kidding.
Wow, Tony's so great. He's really wonderful. No, yeah, I'm excited to be here, and to talk about having a career in this sort of creative industry, and I don't know that I can necessarily give you a blueprint because I don't think that there is one.
Yeah.
If you talk to 10 people, everyone will tell you a different thing because it truly is, there's no one right way to go about doing this. But I can certainly share what has worked for me. And, I've been very fortunate to mentor other filmmakers and other people coming up the industry. And it feels like the process of which I've been able to take and the steps that I've taken have helped other people sort of learn that as well and continue to work. Even in this, I don't know how many of you are in the filmmaking industry at this moment. I know creative industry means a lot of things, but the filmmaking industry is hit a bit of a bump recently in the last year and a half. And it's been interesting to see people pivot, people do different things and try to sort of stay alive. It's also been uh, unfortunate to watch some pretty big companies,
Mm.
go away. Some really talented filmmakers and talented individuals, have to figure out, you know, a big pivot into other things. But it's a tough thing to talk about because we don't know when it's going to end and we don't know what's going to fix it, but we do know that taste is changing, that what buyers are looking for is changing, and what having a career in this industry means is changing a lot as well. So yeah, I mean, I can tell you guys sort of my journey. I have a long and windy road into filmmaking. I moved to New York in 2003 to be an actor and a writer and a comedian. And I was working and, had a acting manager, was producing a comedy show, was doing all the right things, all the right steps. And in 2008, something happened with my family. And for those of you who've seen the sentence, basically something happened to my family, and I decided I needed to figure out how to tell that story. I was not a filmmaker. I didn't know the first thing about filmmaking, but I fired my acting manager. I quit, auditioning. I quit everything and started as an unpaid intern over here on this side. And on this side, I started, shooting and making my film. And so over the course of a decade, I went from well, that was tricky. I went from an intern to a PA to a sound mixer to an editor to a producer to additional photography. Ultimately, I became a cinematographer, shooting films for a lot of really wonderful filmmakers and working on a lot of great films. And then after a decade of kind of secretly making this film, I was fortunate enough for it to get into Sundance, and we ended up winning the audience award at Sundance. Sold to HBO, won the Primetime Emmy that year, and I've been directing ever since. And I think the thing that I learned during that entire process, during that 10 years, I was able to work in many different capacities for a lot of different producers, a lot of different directors. And I learned a lot about how to do things, but I also learned a lot about how I do not want to do things. I worked for some people who just didn't make this work fun, and it's so hard. It's such a tough industry to be in, and it's so many hours, so much hard work that you kind of have to save some room to enjoy it, or else you're really going to, not want to do it very, very often. So I learned that, I would say to myself, if I ever get a chance to direct something and have a team and have people work with me, uh, I'm going to appreciate them and collaborate and do all of those things. And that's one of the things that I think has sort of kept me alive throughout my process of continuing to get work, is I've been fortunate enough to find really wonderful people, really creative collaborators. And I think that they really appreciate the fact that I value them. I value their voice, no matter the position on my team. To me, I don't really believe in a hierarchy when I'm building a team or I'm putting together a show or putting together a film. I think that everybody, to me, one of the big signs of a successful project at the end is when we all sit down and watch it at the premiere or watch our final screening. And I know that everybody who was there and on the team sees some of themselves on that screen, sees their contributions on that screen. Yes, as a director, you have to make tough decisions. You have to decide what the vision is and all these things. But I think as a director, you're also a collaborator and you're appreciating and putting everybody's stories out there. And I think that only makes your films broader. Your films, you're naturally going to have a blind spot in any story that you're telling, and you have to work with your team and trust your team enough to help find those blind spots and tell you where you're not seeing something. So I think like that, having that reputation and having people that I've collaborated with always wanting to come back and work at a high level, I've been very fortunate just to be able to have project after project after project and have amazing people continue to want to work with me.
So Rudy, yeah, I mean, I was thinking about you today, and thank you for starting out acknowledging the challenge that the industry is in. It feels very scary
Yeah.
for a lot of people, but for us who maybe are not as consistently working, but we hope to be. I was reading an article today by the guy, Eric Krupke, who created The Boys on Amazon, and he had a statement saying he thinks it's very hard for a writer to get in the industry right now. It's very, very hard because, even though the strike happened, there's a kind of implosion. He thinks it's going to level out eventually in the future, but right now it's really tough. So I think sustainability is on a lot of our minds, like the business side of stuff and how do you make it. And I know, you had to do, obviously what happened to your sister, you gave up. And I knew that about you, wanted to be an actor and you're doing comedy, which is wild to think you gave that all up, to pursue this justice thing for your sister. And it really worked out for you, which is awesome.
Luckily. I
Yeah.
mean, that
So
was a
you're,
big gamble. That's a
yeah,
bit
it
of a gamble.
was. Yeah. And
Yeah.
on this call, we'll have you all, introduce yourself and ask questions and stuff. We have writers and producers and editors and writer producers and actors and all, documentarians. We have all sorts of different people. But before we jump into those questions from them, what are you talking about when you're mentoring people right now about the sustainability aspect of this? Like people who are getting into it, who are going, I might want to leave my, full-time job to do this. What are your thoughts around that sustainability question?
Yeah, I mean, I think sustainability and mentoring are kind of two different things. I mean, I think when I have filmmakers who I don't even like to say come to me or like I even use the term mentorship loosely because I never want to create like there was this young woman who I was I guess you can call mentoring, and I was like, she's 10 years younger than me. It's way smarter than I am. Like I'm going to be asking her for a job in the next couple of years. She's absolutely amazing. But I think one of the things that I always try to really instill in people, and it's the thing that I think sets me apart and allows me to continue to work, is that I always say I'm not the best director. I'm not the best cinematographer. I'm not the best anything. But what I do know and what I am confident in is that I understand where my feet are, where my roots are, and who I am as a person. And I, am a Mexican American born in Midwest Michigan. And growing up, all I ever wanted was a voice, and I never saw anybody or any stories that really were emblematic of my upbringing. And so I always say like one of my favorite movies growing up was Stand By Me. So it was one of my favorite movies, but it was also one of my least favorite movies because I loved it, but I always wondered why I never saw myself in it. I loved the Wonder Years growing up. I never saw myself in the Wonder Years. And I always used to think like, did we not exist? Were we not present in this time? Like, why don't we exist? And so I set off in my career to say, look, I'm going to try and have a voice and try and put that out there and say, I have a distinct filtration system of what I've lived through. And if I can stick to that as close as possible when I'm creating documentaries, when I'm creating scripted comedy, any of those things, I inherently have a different POV, and it's different. And you want to be different when you're coming up and trying to make a voice for yourself. Because if you're, I always try and tell filmmakers, like, you may really love Quentin Tarantino, you may really love, whoever, but please don't try to be them. Like, don't try to be them. We already have them. We need you. We need your voice. That's what's going to set you apart. And people may not like your voice at the beginning. They may not understand your voice at the beginning, and you are probably going to make a lot of crap. I made a ton of crap, a ton of terrible videos, a ton of terrible short docs, a ton of terrible comedy videos. I've written a ton of terrible jokes, but from each one of those, I learned. You know, it's so funny. Sundance did a whole sort of speakers thing, and my section that I spoke about was failure. You know, one of the best things that I've learned to do in my life is fail, and fail up in a way, because and I think the root of that comes from writing and acting and improv. You know, you're trying things, you're trying big things, and you're going to miss, you're going to swing and miss a lot. But with each one, you're learning, you're honing your craft, and you're understanding how to create a singular voice that people can respond to. And, you know, I think that the toughest part, especially about being a new creative anything, is understanding that failure is one of your best friends. It is the thing that is going to set you apart. Like fail, 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 because that's, you know, I won't say the name of the film, but I have a film that's out right now, and I don't read reviews. I don't read any of that, for I'm too fragile. Like I can't handle any of that stuff. But I was told it has 100 score on Rotten Tomatoes, and that really bothers me, because I'm like, well, then I didn't do something that was going to evoke. I didn't fail enough with it. You know, if everybody's like, yes, this is exactly what it's like, then I've reached this comfortable space with it, and it's not challenging people's sensibilities enough to say, maybe I don't get it. You know, and I know that I'm probably wrong about that, and it's the stupidest thing in the world. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, I can't be complacent, and I can't say, okay, I figured out this formula of how to make films. Because the second you do that with anything creative, and your feet are stuck in the mud, and you're like, I'm just going to go on autopilot here, you're falling behind. You can't be complacent. You can't stop pushing the envelope. And that doesn't mean being controversial or salacious, but just finding new creative ways to say the things you want to say, and continue to evolve in that way. And I've tried to do that with all of my projects. And, you know, I've never read a single review of the sentence, like not one, but I guarantee you, I can tell you if anybody had problems with it, I can tell you exactly what they were and why they were. And I'm okay with that, you know, and I'm good with that.
That's good, Rudy. For you Bay Area people, I just saw a film festival in Oakland in August called the Failure Film Festival or something like that. Like it's
was it awful. All my movies?
No. But I thought, oh my gosh, I think that's amazing. Like they're like, submit every piece of trash, everything you thought was horrible, everything that didn't hit. I'm like, wow. I don't know if I could do that if I want to submit, because I know I have a lot of them, but I don't want to see them again. I don't want to talk about them or surface them. But that is a great piece of advice. And before we jump into questions from everybody, I want to also just say I love your perspective on the representation thing, and that was one of the things that really got me watching the choir. And I was a huge AGT fan, still am. And when the Detroit Youth Choir was on, the moment that Terry did the what's it called, the golden buzzer, and he got all choked up, was because he saw himself in them. Yeah. And I thought that was phenomenal. So I want to just quickly play this trailer, y'all, and then if you want to pepper your questions in for Rudy, we'll go for it. So let's watch this.
1, 2, ready. You can be anybody and be a part of the Detroit Youth Choir. We're the underdog out to prove what we can do.
When I sing, it's like I'm in a different world.
I'm pouring my emotions out onto the audience.
It all does take work, but if I keep going, I'm going to reach my mark.
The amount of dedication it takes to be in DYC is on the same level as a high school athlete.
Hella high water. I want to be able to take these kids to the next big stage. Come on. We performed on some of the biggest stages in America. America's Got Talent wasn't the end of everything. Without further ado, I just want to announce we have been invited to perform in Carnegie Hall. Carnegie is the Super Bowl of musicians. That's why everybody fight to get there. We only have room for 50 kids to travel. It's going to be a hard decision.
I saw people come out crying, so that scared me so much.
If I'm not picked, I'll be devastated.
I'm just ready to get on that stage and prove all those people that were saying that we don't belong here wrong.
This is the hardest I've ever tried for anything.
Just breathe.
This your spot, this your moment.
I want to be someone that people remember.
It takes many performers a lifetime to make it to Carnegie Hall. So consider yourselves among the elites.
This is one of the grandest moments that I'll ever have in my life.
We want to be that choir that changes lives again and again. Showtime.
Yeah, baby, showtime. So many good nuggets there. Okay, team, anybody want to unmute and ask Rudy a question? Introduce yourself, say anything about you, what you do, what's surfacing in your mind and heart, because I got lots of questions, but I want to have some interaction.
Hello.
Hi.
That's okay. Hi, Rudy. I'm Olga. We chatted on Instagram a little bit about socials. I'm the person, annoying one, who collects all the bios and pictures. Thanks so much for being with us today, and really, really impressive portfolio. I have not honestly watched the fully your film, but I do get really connected to Sentence, and I will watch it. I watch all the trailers, all the Q&As, and I produce as well. So really a lot to learn, a lot to listen today, and to hear from you. And my question is really about that specific film, because as you mentioned today and in Q&As, it's personal. It's something that actually happened. It's a documentary, and it has to do with your family. So I have two questions really. One is, how do you sort of detach yourself as a filmmaker and a brother, or not try to be having any biases, any kind of personal interpretation, and only showing facts, what actually happened and how it was for both sides of the story? And the second question is, how do you also make it more cinematic and dramatic and add elements that people would want to watch? Because sometimes documentaries just like this happen and in a sequence. So how do you make it fun for people to relate to and to watch? And how do you keep yourself out of it, of not becoming more of an advocate for one side or the other? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is one of the biggest challenges when telling a personal story, because I know 100% why I changed my entire life to tell that story. It was something that mattered a lot to me as a brother, as an uncle, as a son, as all of those things. And so I started this process again, not knowing anything about the filmmaking process. I knew about story. I was a writer, I was an actor, I was all of these things. So I've always had a really strong grasp of story. And I knew that at the very least, I had a beginning, middle, and an end when I started this. The beginning was her going away and seeing the immediate ramifications that it had on the family. And then I knew that no matter what happened, I was going to film until she came out, whether that was in 10 years, 15 years, whenever. And so I had an end. And I knew that the middle of that was going to be, and I can tell you, when I started making that film, I went to my parents and I went to my sister and I asked for permission. I said, I'd like your permission to tell this story, because it is our story, and I think that it can have a huge impact. And I remember my dad saying, like, what do you want me to do? And I said, Dad, I don't want you to do anything. Like, I'm not asking you to do anything. I said, if you are open and honest and vulnerable and allow me to capture these moments, I promise you, Dad, that I will make something good. And when I said that to him, I said, and I don't mean a good film. I said, I want to make something for the greater good. And that was always my process and what was in the back of my mind. And what I'd never really thought about during that process was how difficult it actually was going to be. I remember I was like one of the first Thanksgivings I flew back and I was filming with my family, and my sister called sort of organically, and someone handed the phone to my father, and up until that point in my life, I'd only seen my father cry one other time, and he completely broke down while I was filming. And it was my first real gut check on if I could make this film, because I said to myself, Rudy, what are you doing? Put the camera down, go and hug your father, go and tell him it's going to be okay, that we're going to make it through this, that we're going to do all these things, and everything's going to be fine. And then something else happened in my head, and it said, no, you asked them you said that if they were open and honest and vulnerable and forgot that you had a camera, that you would make something for the greater good. This is your chance to do that. And so what I had to do was create this barrier between me and my family whenever I was there. Was I started to say, are you in focus? Do you have enough battery? Do you have enough cards? Are you in focus? How's the audio? Are you in focus? Do you have enough battery? Do you have enough cards? How's the audio? And I started to create this barrier between me and my family, and it was very difficult. And it was something that actually didn't hit me until much, much, much later, after the film was done, that the biggest sacrifice that I made during that process was that I wasn't able to be there emotionally for my family for a decade in those very specific moments. And so it was tough to make that, but I think that it was necessary. And I think, again, I didn't know a lot about filmmaking. I'd worked on other people's films, and I immediately thought, well, if I'm going to make this about mandatory minimum sentencing, and I'm going to make this about what's happened to my sister, I need to go to DC. I need to go to these hearings. I need to go. And so I started filming in DC and traveling as much as I could and doing all this stuff. I would drive. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and I would drive to DC in the morning and drive back at night just to film for 2 hours if there was a hearing or something. And then I quickly started to realize, as I was watching footage, that that stuff didn't hold a candle to what was happening at home with my nieces and with my family. And so after a couple of years of chasing this sort of larger sort of political story, I decided, no, we hear that all the time. We see that all the time. What we never see are the actual ramifications on a family, on a kid, and a very internal story. So I shifted my entire focus and said, it's going to be told from inside, because this isn't a documentary that has a director and a producer and an AP and a cameraman holding the story. It's the son, it's the uncle, it's the brother. Whenever you see something there, you are seeing it through the eyes of a family member. And so I set out to tell that intimate story. And, about making it cinematic, I think a lot of that just has to do with, again, understanding story and understanding where it's going and what it's going to be, and ultimately having complete trust from your family. There's a scene with my mother there. There's probably one of the most cinematic scenes when she goes to the window and she says, I look up at the moon at night and I realize, that Cindy looks up at the same moon, and I talk to her that way. And one of the producers early on that started looking at footage, they said, how did you get your mom to say that? And I said, what do you mean get my mom to say that? They're like, what did you say to get her to go and make that analogy or whatever? And I said, I didn't say anything. And they were like, come on. And I took them to the raw footage and I put it in and I backed it all the way back that day. And for 3 hours, it was just my mom cooking, cleaning, chatting with me. But I knew for a fact that my sister's absence was so close to the surface for everyone in my family that if I just stayed there long enough, something was going to happen. And so I was patient. And before I knew it, my mom felt that in her heart. And she said, I talked to Cindy. And I said, what do you mean? And she walks to the thing. And so those moments will happen when you have trust, when you're able to actually film life, because those are the things that any audience member can tell when somebody's saying, okay, now go to the window and look up at the moon and say you're talking to your sister or you're talking to your daughter. It feels canned and it feels inauthentic. But when you have those moments naturally unfolding in front of you and you have the patience and you have the wherewithal to just follow and be patient and let it unfold, that's where storytelling, for me anyways, from my perspective, that's where it comes from. When it's honest and it's open and there's trust. And so I was fortunate enough that my family trusted me and I was able to find those moments.
That's incredible. It's really like it's a beautiful, beautiful reflection on that. Thank you for sharing with us. And I feel like just like for me personally, 2 words to summarize like both questions is focus and patience. Like be present, be honest, be really dedicated to your craft, but also setting boundaries, and then patience with how the story unfolds. It will happen. Just don't push it, don't force it. It will happen. Just be authentic. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Rudy.
Yeah, and just to speak a little bit to the bias of the situation, you know, I think that I was given notes or given advice throughout the process of how to politically slant the sentence, how to say, this is what we have to say, and this is what we have to say to lawmakers, and this is what we have to do. And everything started to become this like real bias, anti-Republican thing. And I'm a Democrat, I'm happy to say that. But I knew that if I made a film that preached to the choir, I might as well not make the film. Because all I'm gonna do is make something that speaks exactly to the people who are affected and understand what's going on. And they're just gonna say, see, somebody else who agrees with us. Or I could tell something that was personal without political bias and say, here's a human story. And the ramifications of that, of telling a human story, not a political story, when it came to this, you know, mandatory minimum banner, the first call that I got post Sundance, I got a call on my cell phone and it literally said Congress on it. And I was like, what do I do? My producer was like, answer the phone. And so I answered the phone, and it was a Republican senator from Utah who said, I've been fighting for mandatory minimum sentencing and reform for most of my career. He said, I've never had a tool in front of me like your film that I could take to my side of the aisle and say, this is why we fight for this. He said, may I please show this on Capitol Hill? And I said, yeah, you can, but it needs to be a bipartisan screening. It cannot be a Republican screening. It cannot be a Democratic screening. It needs to be a bipartisan screening. So Senator Mike Lee from Utah, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey came together and showed it on Capitol Hill. And there's a little article that was written in the Washington Post that says, little known film making big waves for mandatory minimum sentencing. And they credit the film being one of the big things that pushed the First Step Act over the line and changed the lives of up to 80,000 people. So when you talk about making something for the greater good, that was my win. That we didn't just tell the story of my family, and it was never a story for my family, it was a story about my family. It was a story for all of the other families who were going through this. I always intended on filming until my sister came home. It was never going to be let's tell a story so that just my sister can get out. It's going to be a story of, let's tell what's happening to thousands of other people and thousands of other children who have a loved one that are incarcerated. And that was my biggest win, was when we were a part of pushing that over the finish line and really affecting the lives of tens of thousands of people.
I really resonate too with the idea, obviously, stories, right? We're all creators and makers, storytellers, filmmakers. You know, BraveMaker, our whole motto is you are the story. And I find myself trying to think of my life as a story too, right? And when things aren't working out, you know, when you were driving to DC and recognizing that that wasn't the story that you were needing to be telling, it was at home. I think that's so powerful, like for all of our lives, especially as we talk about the ups and downs of the industry. Is, you know, am I pushing this boulder up a hill for the wrong reasons? Is there's a different boulder I should be pushing up? Because it's going to be hard no matter what. You know, it's like what boulder, what hill do I choose sometimes? So I'm like even trying to like process that in myself for my own life. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just, I always like to tell this other story because it's a reminder of how close to the margins we are with so much of this stuff. You know, in 2017, I had this little tiny office in Gowanus, Brooklyn. And when I say tiny, it was like, I don't even know if they can legally call it an office, but I had this little office and I was there at like 2 a.m. I had just gotten back from DC. I was looking at footage. I was looking at all this stuff. And I break down crying because I knew that I had something special. I knew it. And at that moment, I thought, nobody's ever going to see this. No one's ever going to see this film. And I wanted to give up and I wanted to stop doing all of this. And things just fell into place. You know, people talk about hard work and they talk about all those things. Yeah, you need hard work, and you need to get better at your craft, and you need to try and be better every single day. But I never like to discount luck and timing and how that plays a role in everything. And the reason that I say that is because when you say it's hard work and talent or whatever, I think it can be very alienating for people who feel as though they're working very hard and they haven't gotten anywhere. And they think, well, then I'm never going to get anywhere. You can. You have to wait for your moment. And when that moment comes, be ready to take it. And you don't know when that moment's going to come, but just get better every day. I was so fortunate that my first film, The Sentence, took 10 years. And in those 10 years, I learned to edit, I learned to produce, I learned to be a sound mixer, I learned to be a cinematographer. I learned to do all of those things so that when my next project came, I wasn't like, I didn't have this idea of, well, I did this and it was kind of luck that it all happened. I'd also put in the work. So when the Brooklyn Saints, I'm actually women's sweatshirt. I had a series called The Brooklyn Saints on Netflix, and I remember when I started it, I said, this can't suck, because then they're going to think, well, he did The Sentence and that's all he could really do. And it took me about 3 or 4 weeks before I sat there and I said, I'm a filmmaker. I'm a storyteller. I can do this. And I commanded that story and I commanded that series. And that led to, since 2018, I think I've made 2 series and 12 films, and it's because of the 10 years of work that I put in and the luck that gave me a platform to be a director. But could have very easily never had The Sentence come out, and I'd probably still be shooting for other people and editing and doing all those other things, waiting for my shot.
Other questions? Go ahead, Stacy. Another documentarian filmmaker.
Hi, Rudy. Thanks so much for your films. I did watch The Sentence. Such an important film. I'm in my 4th year production for directing my first feature documentary. It's about a mom in Ohio who was jailed for falsifying documents to enroll her daughters into her father's school district. And I believe your sister was 6 years when they came after, that they came after her. And so with my film participant, it was 18 months. She removed her daughters from her father's school district, and he lived 5 minutes away, but it was a different school district. And 18 months later, then her and her dad were charged with the 3 felonies. So, it's a nationwide thing where I didn't even know that you could get charged like years later. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was eye-opening. So what I'm saying is it's important for people to know. So thank you for your work. And then also like you said that you were going to the hearings in DC. I also started off with expert interviews. I thought that would be a good fit for my doc, realized that wasn't. Then I moved to the education realm because I'm very interested in education issues. I used to be a teacher, and it's with my film participants case, it received national media attention, and it's just so controversial and bipartisan issues. Like, people go really crazy with dances. And so I didn't want to get involved. So now we're changing it after the 4th year into a documentary about her and her father's love, like a father's loyalty to his family. Because when you look at the footage, that's what it's really about, not even the education stuff. So I've kind of not felt like a failure, but I've had to try, and things don't work and you get disappointed because you've lost money and time, I felt, but I guess I am getting closer to my goal. But my question, I guess, is how did you find your producers and your executive producers? Did you have them at the beginning of your project, or when did they come?
So they came much later for a number of reasons. I got turned down for every grant, every fellowship, everything throughout the entire process. I was fortunate enough, again, I was building this other career on the other side. So I was meeting a lot of filmmakers. I was meeting a lot of different people. And there were a couple of people, there were these producers that, you know, a few years in were like, we'd love to give you some money to help you finish this film. And I said, I can't take any money right now. A, because I didn't want to waste anybody's money. And B, I didn't want to be beholden to anyone at that point. I had a very clear vision, and yeah, it was tight because I was working to work. I was working in everybody else's film to go and make this. But I had the good fortune that I was a sound mixer, I was a producer, I was a cinematographer, I was all of these things. So it was just me. So it would literally be just me going out and getting footage and shooting and doing all these things. And so I was able to maintain that for a very long time. When the film was finished, when I was like, okay, I'm done shooting and now I have to edit, I showed it, you know, when my sister, I don't know, have you guys all seen the sentence already? I don't want to give any spoiler alerts, but at the end, my sister ends up getting clemency from President Obama, and it makes big news. And people were like, hey, like people were starting to put two and two together, like what I was doing. And I had some people call me and they're like, we'd love to give you money to finish this. We heard you've been making this for 10 years. We heard you have all this amazing footage, and nobody had seen anything. And this production company who I'd known for a while and actually met because I used to teach their daughter in kindergarten and preschool. I met them years and years and years prior. They were like, look, we don't have a ton of money. We don't make documentaries, but we believe in you. And we believe in what you've been doing. They knew about the sort of political aspect and everything that's going on throughout the whole process. And so I said, I'd love to go with you guys. But the only thing that I need, the only thing that I want from this, you can have anything you want, any credits you want, whatever. I was like, I just need final cut. And they said, great, we will help you finish this. And you have final cut in all of this, because I knew it was going to be probably my only chance ever to have final cut. And it was a story about my family. And so what I'm getting at is I worked on it completely by myself until it was time to finish the film, because then that's when, you know, if you want to finish it for a Sundance or for a film festival, you need to pay an editor. And I was an editor, so I could have sat down and edited this film. But the thing that I knew about myself and I knew about storytelling was that I know why I love my father. I know why I love my nieces. I know why I love my sister. I needed other people to understand that. And so I wanted to bring in somebody who didn't know me, who didn't know anything about the story, who didn't know any of my family members, and say, look, here's what the film is. Here's what I'm looking for. And the thing that I can easily go from A to C is love. I was like, I need you to find B. I need you to understand why you love my family. And so bringing on those producers allowed me to bring on an editor and go through that entire process. And so if you're asking how to find producers or how to find funding, is that what you're getting at? Like you're trying to figure out how to finish the film?
Kind of, but I like you, I've been doing it mostly myself. I do have an editor, but at some point I will need to get a dedicated producer. Yeah.
For what exactly?
Because you need a producer. I mean,
like for funding or for organization or?
I mean, the funding stuff I could do myself, find funding. Like I've been applying for grants. I haven't received any, but I don't know what more a producer could do in terms of getting funding. Just to have, you know, another team person attached to spread the workload.
Yeah. Okay. So then you probably want, if you're finishing your film and getting towards the end, you probably want somebody who's well-versed in kind of post-production and sort of finishing producing. I mean, where are you located in the US?
I'm in the Bay Area.
Okay. Oh, there's tons of wonderful people in the Bay Area. I mean, are you connected to any of the like filmmaking networks in the Bay Area?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I think that's where you go. You find somebody there who's equally interested and wants to, you know, help you tell the story. Obviously, if you can pay them, it's better. But I agree, like that workload at the end can be a lot. You know, I have a couple of great people that work for me that, I shouldn't say work for me, work with me that really, again, like find your blind spots and help you, you know, fill all those holes that happen towards the end, the permissions, the releases, the archive, the music, all the legal stuff. I would say go to a local, you want somebody local, somebody near you that can just be on your team and be as invested in this project as you are, with the hopes of putting it out into the world. I mean, that's the first thing I look for anybody that comes on any of my projects is, are you doing this because you want a job, or are you doing this because you love this? I understand if you want it to be a job, that's totally fine. And everyone, even the people who love it, like, they need to make money as well. And I get that, but I try to find people who are passionate about the story and want to be a part of that sort of collaborative storytelling. And, you know, you that's the, like, hand in hand thing with filmmaking, especially with such passion projects, is you can find great people. And as soon as you told me what your film was about, I was like, do you need somebody to come? Like, I think that it's such an amazing story. And it's at its core, it's a story about wanting better for your kids. Who can't relate to that? Who in this country cannot relate to just doing anything you can to give your kids a better chance? You know, I think just sharing that with people who are prospective producers, you're going to get a lot of people who say, let me help you bring this home.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And yes, Rudy, send her people. She's amazing.
Yeah.
What other
hi,
questions?
Rudy.
Go ahead, Kelly.
I'm Kelly. I don't know if you can totally hear me. I'm in a coffee shop in Ohio right now. So
I can hear you.
I'm a producer as well. And I was just curious, like, you knew the story that you wanted to tell, and were you immediately sure you wanted to do it as a documentary instead of a narrative? And then kind of follow along with that. Your documentary obviously has made such a huge impact already. Do you feel that those impact stories are more documentaries? And do you ever hesitate because sometimes those are harder to have a market or sell?
Yeah, I mean, it was always going to be a documentary at the core level. I mean, I was a writer and a playwright and all those things. So I think the scripted part of it is always in the back of my mind. I'm always working on the scripted version of it. But I think as far as impact goes for me and sort of the pedigree that I had of filmmaking, I knew that the documentary route was going to be the most attainable for me, with the ability to, again, like, have that final cut and own the messaging. Because I think, with any impact film, as soon as you start to take it out there and have other nonprofits come on board, it can very quickly be co-opted by a lot of people that like to politicize and sort of change the narrative of what you're actually trying to say. And I was very cognizant of that, and I was very protective of that throughout the entire process, because early on the sentence could have really become a real political pawn and, like, really alienated a lot of the people that you need on your side to really make effective change. And so for me, it was always going to be a documentary, because that's what I had access to at the time. I had a Canon 5D, a 50 millimeter 1.2, and an onboard mic. I couldn't have done anything other than a documentary at that point. But in the future, I think it will become a scripted piece, and it'll have a different type of impact and a different type of story to be told. But yeah, I think it was always going to be that for me, and that was my goal.
Thank you so much. I love stories like that, and special stories that are true but make a difference, which is why I love BraveMaker too. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I've got to jump early too.
No worries, Kelly.
Okay.
No worries. Rudy, can you talk a little bit about, I know you had, what's the name of your editor that you worked with?
Viri.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you've worked with them on a couple of different projects. So I like that,
Yeah.
seeing that name pop up, from Brooklyn, the Saints to The Sentence to other things. But
yeah, she cut she cut The Sentence, she cut Choir, she cut my Carlos Santana film, she cut my Maya Moore 30 for 30, she cut I try to get her in as much as I can. When I met her for the first time, I don't think that she'd fully cut a film on her own at that point. But I brought her in to look at footage. She was a friend of a friend. And I think within 5 minutes, I realized that it was kind of like the first time I met my wife. I was like, this person's very special. And then I met Viri, this editor. I was like, so I think of my wife as sort of my life partner, and Viri is sort of my creative partner in a lot of ways. But within 5 minutes, we were just so totally in sync, visually, aesthetically, pace-wise, of like what we want to put out into the world. And I just knew immediately, so much so that I forgot to hire her. We got along so well that I forgot to hire her on the spot. I had to call her later. I was like, it was such a great interview. I forgot to hire you. She was like, I wasn't sure. She was like, I thought it felt really good, but I wasn't sure. And, we've been fortunate enough to work on a lot of projects ever since, but she is one of the people that, over the course of that 10 years and like even post the sentence in directing, like I've sort of had these people that have been on projects of mine, and I'm like, well, you're coming with me, you're coming with me, you're coming with me. And I try to get them on everything. If you look at the credits on my films, like you'll see a lot of names repeated. And it's because I adhere very strictly to a no a-hole rule. Like you can't, I don't have time or space for that, in my productions. And we laugh a lot, we enjoy what we do a lot, and we listen to each other, and we're friends, and we're creatives, and we're all of those things. And I think that I've been really, really fortunate to be able to put together a team of a sort of collective of really talented people, but just wonderful people who are in this because they want to put interesting things and love out into the world. And Viri is at the top of that list with me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyone else want to surface a question? I can always pop in, but anyone else want to unmute and ask a question? Well, I would love to hear.
I was going to say, I can give one more little story about that I think is interesting, but it's also the thing that has really carried me as a storyteller and as a director. Very, very early on in making the sentence, again, I was making it in secret. Nobody knew that I was doing it. And I'd been filming for a couple of years, 2-3 years. And I'd put together like a 20-minute cut up until that point. And I had the good fortune of working with some pretty prominent filmmakers at the time. I was, sound mixer, whatever, but I had access to them. And I asked one of them, would you be willing to look at something that I'm working on? I'd love some advice. And they're like, yeah. And so I brought my laptop and I sort of played and I sort of sat back. And this person looked at it for about a minute and a half and stopped it and said, I've already made that film. Like, it's been done. Who cares? And slammed my laptop down. And I was absolutely crushed because I had changed everything in my life. I quit teaching, I quit acting, I quit writing, I quit comedy, I quit everything because of this story. And I sat there and I thought about what he said. I've already made this. It's been done. Who cares? Who cares? Who cares? Who cares? Who cares? And then I thought, oh shit, that's the best advice I've ever gotten. Who cares? I know why I care about this. Why should anybody else care? Why does anybody else care about my family? Why does anybody else care about my nieces? Why would they care? And it changed my entire perspective of how I started to shoot that film and tell that story. Who cares is now written on every one of my cameras, on every one of my computers, every one of my things. I think, who cares? And why would they care?
Yeah.
And he tried to tear me down, but he gave me the very tool that has lifted me through every one of my projects since then. And that's something that I always tell people to think of in the back of their mind when they're telling a story, especially a personal story, because it's very, very easy for us to get there to understand why we care about something. But the important thing is trying to to take that so that other people, so that somebody in Wyoming cares, so that somebody in Florida cares, so that somebody in Texas cares, because we're trying to get a story out, not for ourselves, but for other people to see themselves in, to lean forward and relate. You know, the sentence is about a Mexican-American family in Midwest Michigan who had somebody go away for 15 years for a federal prison sentence. Who can relate to that? Very few people. But at the core of that story is what happens when you love something so much that you'll go to the ends of the earth to fight for them. When you watch my father go and pick metal so that he can turn it in to send money to my sister so that she can talk to her kids, you see yourself in that. You see your father in that. You see a loved one in that, and the ends that they will go to. And underneath the layer at the very bottom of the sentence is, what do we do when we feel like we don't have a voice? We fight. We fight for a voice until we can't fight any longer. So many people, whether they can relate to exactly what's happening with my family or not, can find a way to step in and see themselves, see their mother, see their sister, see their family members. And that's the sort of secret to all of that. Like the Carlos Santana film I just did. How many of us are guitar icons? Maybe just Tony. But the thing is, Carlos Santana is a young kid who started playing in a strip club at 12 years old in Tijuana, Mexico. And he found himself getting to the Bay Area and saying, you know what? I believe in myself enough that I'm going to risk everything. I'm going to risk it all to chase my dream. And at the core, it's a story about somebody believing in themselves enough to do anything they can to achieve their dream. We all have dreams. We all have things we want to do. So we can step in because he is one version of the blueprint of what you do to become the greatest. Maya Moore's story. Who here is arguably one of the best WNBA players ever? Nobody here, maybe Tony. But what happens is she's at the top of her career. She quits at the pinnacle of her career to fight for somebody who she believes is wrongfully incarcerated. We can't agree, we can't relate directly to that, but we can relate to the core of that story. Is what will you do to what end when you believe in somebody? You'll do anything you can. You'll follow your heart. And that's a story of believing in somebody and saying, I will risk everything for you. And we can relate to that as human beings. I start every single project by wiping away the headline and finding the humanity of what would not this icon do? What would my neighbor do? What would my father do? How do we get to that level of humanity with every story?
Boom, Rudy with the inspiration and the jokes. See, you didn't give up the jokes there.
I can't. I tried. I really tried. I really tried to.
I feel so that in my heart, because I'm trying to battle in my own mind, like, what do people care about, right? Because there's so much noise out there. It's so clouded, and trying to break through to tell your story, or to put on an event, or raise money for a film, or to find a producer, all of those things, it just feels so hard. So I think, thank you. You just have to keep going. I know, like, looking at Valerie, thinking of the books Valerie's writing and the kids' work that she is doing and the graphic novels, and it's been years upon years, but just trying, okay, if this doesn't work, then I go over this way, and what do I do? So that's great. We have like 4 more minutes, y'all. If anybody else wants to say anything, Valerie, there you go. Now's your time. Go.
Thank you so much. I've just been absorbing every word, but I wanted to say something to you. You remind me so much of my favorite person in the whole world, but a younger version with such significant opportunity ahead with what you're doing. But it's Father Greg Boyle of Homeboy Industries.
Oh, I love Father Greg Boyle.
I swear, I'm hearing him. I hear his voice in you, and his spirit in you, and the humanity that you do bring forth. That's it, right? How you're bringing the humanity of the person. And I've always found the sentences, the sentence, not the film, but the sentence, to say a death sentence or something like your sister has experienced, to be such cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah.
And for the family.
Yeah.
Right. But it's so rarely shown.
Yeah.
And But anyway, I just wanted to say that to you. There's something very incredibly special in your spirit.
I
So that's all I
appreciate
wanted to say about that. Yeah.
But you have to understand that we all have that. Like, as soon as I started talking about humanity, everybody in this perked up, because we forget about that sometimes. We forget about, with the idea of what is happening, especially in the entertainment industry and in the media. There's so much stuff out there that is salacious and tedious and tropey, and not that it's wrong, because people like to put stuff on because they want to turn their brain off and not think about things, and that sells and people want to see that, and I 100% get it. But we also can't forget that when those things strike, when those projects hit that have an ounce of humanity in them, we know it reminds us that we're part of this, spinning rock together, that we have to look around and see each other and understand that we're all a part of this process. And, yes, we can watch, Survivor season 145 right now. I don't know what we're on right now, but, and it can take us away from what we're thinking about during the day. But, at some point we have to remember that there are things happening, like this woman being, incarcerated in Ohio for wanting something better for her children. There are things happening all the time, and it's happening right up the road. It's happening next to you. And people want that too. It's just not so easily spoon-fed, and it's not as marketable. But it's important, and it's a reminder, and it's getting fewer and far between, but we can't stop telling those stories.
Yeah.
Amen. Great way to end. Thank you, Rudy. That was so great. Y'all follow Rudy. I put his Insta in the chat so you can keep up to what he's doing next. He's doing a lot of things. The Real Rudy V on IG. And
in my defense, I made that before I thought anybody would ever follow me. That's why it's REEL. I was like, how clever is that? Like,
you're so clever. You are a filmmaker. You do reels. Now Instagram
Real. I'm like, get it? Film reel? And now I'm like, I have to justify it whenever it's out there. But thank you for having me.
Heck yeah. Thank you so much. This is only our fourth time meeting. So we just started this about a month ago, and it's just hopefully we're going to grow it so people can get inspired, professionally developed, make connections, and keep each other accountable to making their work. So, writer, producers, editors, filmmakers, actors, authors, it's just so cool. We're trying to do more of this. So thank you for being one of our guest speakers. It's awesome, and we'll keep following you, and hopefully we can bring you out back to the Bay again someday, Rudy. That was awesome when you came out in 2019, and when we had more funding than we have now. So we gotta get back to those days.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, and it's wonderful to meet everybody.
I really appreciate you, Rudy. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
See you. Everybody else, if you want to stay on for an extra minute, I'll hang out a little bit. But thank you for being here. And anyone have any comments or questions? I think Stacy needs to shoot her shot with Rudy and follow up and see if he'll take a look at some footage or something like that. Stacy, I'm serious.
Yeah, I will. I'm putting it in the chat. It's talking back to the sentence. It reminds me of, so it's a film called Kimba. It's a narrative fiction film, but it's based on a real life situation that's similar to The Sentence with Rudy's sister. When I was in high school, they told us about this woman who she didn't know that her boyfriend was a drug dealer, and similar situation, and they were telling us as high school students, beware, like, who you date and all this stuff. So now 20 years later, there's this narrative fiction film about it. So I just think that's interesting.
Yeah. And he said that interesting too. That's in the works, I'm sure, for him in some way,
right?
Or at least on his mind. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll share that with him in case. I'm sure he knows about this film, but
yeah. Gabrielle and Roselle, this is your first time being with us. So thank you for jumping on. Good to have you both here. You want to introduce yourself to the others before we jump off?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle. I got connected with BraveMaker recently in this last Academy session. I was in my friend Nader's film he shared last year at the Film Fest called Faith. And yeah, I just stayed connected with BraveMaker, but took the step this year. I was completing my degree at SF State here in San Francisco in communication studies, but always had like a love for acting because of the storytelling and just sharing about the human experience. And so I've just been taking steps towards being, surrounded, similar to what Rudy was saying today, with other creative people who just, are passionate about sharing stories and learning more about my own voice as a Latina American in the Bay Area and being more comfortable sharing or growing confidence in doing that. So really happy to be here, and yeah.
Awesome. So glad to have you. Right on. And Roselle, editor, also San Francisco State. Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry. I actually just graduated too. Hi, I'm Roselle Aguilar. I graduated from SF State as well in the Broadcast and Communications of Arts department. I got onto BraveMaker last fall. I think I was researching like just places to intern at because I just really wanted to be in the environment of filmmaking. And I filled out the form for a volunteer intern. And I think he got back to me like maybe 3 days later, and I was like, what? But I'm editing two BraveMaker short films right now. I think one of them is going to premiere at the BraveMaker Film Fest, the Eulogies. And it's been a really fun experience. I love to edit. I sometimes sit for hours just at my computer, and then I realize I've forgotten to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But I also have a passion for cinematography, and I'm now trying to create my own, I guess, mini stories or content on Instagram just to showcase some of that. And I feel like it's been interesting doing more cinematography, having done more editing, because I could see that my lens is very different. Like I shoot knowing how I want it to look when I edit it, or knowing what is available to me in post. So it's been a fun learning experience for sure.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, thank you all for being here. And we are back next Monday. Next Monday is a regular meeting with all of us doing some sharing. If anybody wants to do a hot seat, which means you share some pages, or you share a rough cut, or you share some writing, or you share a monologue, or whatever you want to do. And then we do feedback. And then we've got an acting focus. Olga, can you remind me when Tristan's coming back? Is it the last?
The 24th.
The 24th of June. So next week will be our roundtable with just us. Then we do an acting focus about auditioning. And then we do another week of just us. And then we have a screenwriter the first Monday in July from What We Do in the Shadows. Her name is Lauren Wells. That's a mockumentary about vampires. And she also wrote a podcast called Minna and Lucy Guide to Slaying Dracula. So she will be focused on writing in those two ways, writing in a writer's room and then writing a podcast, which is kind of cool and interesting. So, and don't forget, you all get 50% off the film festival tickets and 20% off classes and all that kind of stuff for being a member. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week. We'll be around on Thursday night in the square. If everybody wants to come out, there's an actor thing happening and then a free film for a preview for the festival. The Moon is in Aquarius. That's on Thursday night, June 13th. It's on Instagram and all the places. Okay. See you.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Thank
Bye.
you all. Ciao.